Hi there, my name's Chad Park. I am one of the co-chairs of the Possibility Panel and really pleased to be your host for tonight. And
the one that you missed.
oh, I guess the first thing I'm going to do is ask everyone to go on to mute. And thank you. We'll get started in just a moment. I want to welcome you and thank you for coming. I know there's lots of ways you can spend an evening, and really grateful to you for choosing to spend it this way with us. For those of you for whom this is your first session of the Possibility Panel in the next 30, welcome in particular, and also welcome to the people who've been at previous ones. For those who don't know, this is our second session of the Possibility Panel. Last week we had the first one on the topic of economic diversification. Tonight we're going to be focused on how we go about building an inclusive social fabric. We got a great lineup and a great session planned here, I think. So really pleased that you can be here. For those of you who haven't been to one of our sessions before, just to give you a heads up, our intention is to make these sessions as interactive as possible. So there'll be dialogue and there'll be chatter in the chat box, and there'll be Q&A and various other ways of engaging, and I'll go through that in just a moment. So really encourage you to do it and to engage, and again, thank you for being here. The first thing, we can go to the next slide. I'll just quickly run through the plan, I guess, for how we're going to spend the next couple hours. So first, doing some welcome and introduction. I'll give a little overview and background, and we'll also just do a very quick test of the technology for you. We'll frame up the issue, why we're talking about this topic, and then we'll get into an initial session with four of the members of our Possibility Panel, who are each going to speak for about 5 minutes on their perspective on the topic and what they think is possible for Alberta on this topic. We'll have a chance for Q&A there, so you'll have a chance to ask questions and engage and so on. And then we'll get into kind of more of a brainstorming discussion, which we'll do through breakout groups. And I'm going to say right now, and I'll reiterate later, that breakout group is really important for this process, because out of that we will generate some ideas that we want to harvest, and all of this is meant to serve as input to the Possibility Panel as they go through these sessions and sort of take on the task of synthesizing an output for ideas for what's possible for the future of Alberta. We'll have four other Possibility Panel members offer some closing reflections, and that should take us right to about 9 o'clock tonight. So it was great to see all the for those of you who just joined right at 7, there were several people who were signing in early, and there's great to see people who've signed in from all across the province and actually even beyond. I think I saw one from St. John, and it's fantastic. I think at this point, I would imagine that for most of you, probably the technology of Zoom might be familiar, but I am just going to just give you a little tour there. If you go down on the left, that's where you can use the mute and unmute and hide and show your video. We encourage you to show your video if possible, because it makes it more personal and interactive, I guess. We've also got a chat box, and I see some people already using it. I think you're probably familiar with it. That's down at the bottom. And the next slide is the testing or showing this function that some people may not be as familiar with, which is annotation. So if you go up to where it says View Options, it comes down and gives you the opportunity to choose annotation, and with that you can mark up the screen, as some of you are doing now. Okay, so there you go. Good for you to test out that it's working. Thank you. And we'll use that in just a moment, actually, the annotation function. One more thing, which is new to this session, for those of you who've been with us for previous sessions, we finally figured out how to do closed captioning for the session. So you've probably noticed that across the bottom is a live transcript. And if that closed captioning, the live transcript is bothering you, if you'd rather it not be there, then you can go and click on that and turn it on, click it to off, or sorry, to hide subtitle. So that's how you would get rid of it if you don't want to see it. But for those who do want to see it, there it is. Hopefully that's all clear. If you, maybe I'll just take this moment to recognize Anne, Steph, and Kyla, who are from Spark Event Management, and they're doing all the behind the scenes support for us in terms of technology. So thank you very much to all of you. And if you have questions, you can post them in the chat. Let's go to the next slide. And for that, I'm going to do a land acknowledgement to get us started. And I'm going to invite Atif from the possibility panel to come and speak. If you don't know Atif, I think you should. This will be your first chance to hear him. And he's formerly the director of Startup Edmonton and has just taken on a new role as the CEO of the North Pine Foundation. So Atif, welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chad. Right, so thank you so much for letting me do this land acknowledgement. And hello everyone, Tansi, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. And I like to make land acknowledgements a bit personal. So I actually first wanted to start off with a verse from the Quran. And why is it that land acknowledgements are personal for me? So I'll quickly say the verse and then the English translation. Kaufa wa in yadharu alaykum la yarkubu fikum ilalla wa la dhimma yurdu anakum bi afwahim wa taba kulubuhum wa shuruhum fi sukun. So what that translates to is, how can there be a treaty while if they gain dominance over you, they do not observe concerning you any pact of kinship or covenant of protection? They satisfy you with their mouths, but their hearts refuse, and most of them are disobedient. And that's in the Quran, Surah 9, verse 8. So the reason it's personal when I talk about land acknowledgements and being a treaty person is my culture is stitched together by many aspects. And being on this land is a big piece of it. So I am keen to understand my connection to the history of this land as a treaty person to better understand myself. I aim to learn more about the original people of this land that continue to inform my culture, and I appreciate and honor those of the past, the present, and the future here. So thank you for letting me share that.
Thank you, Atif, that's great. I know that one of the things we learn, and I've learned from Indigenous culture, is just how important it is to have a relationship to the land, as you're talking about, Atif. And so this exercise, those of you who've been to earlier sessions, you've done it before, but we're going to add a little twist to it. This is your chance, by the way, as well, to practice using the annotate function. So go ahead up there and do it, and mark on the map here a place or a piece of land that means a lot to you. And that part we've tried before, but if you might also enter into the chat box after you've done that, why that piece of land matters to you. And let's get a conversation going in the chat box on that as you do it. Thank you. Thank you. I see some people saying it's home, the source of water, it's where I grew up. And it looks like some of you have several pieces of land that mean something special to you. Thank you for doing that. I'll let people continue to do it. Okay, thank you very much. And with that, we'll move on to the next slide. Just going to take a minute to provide some background on the next 30. I suspect that if you're here, you've got some kind of inkling of what this is about, but just in case, it would be useful to have a background. This is the moment where I'll do that, and it's just to let you know that the Next 30 is a new not-for-profit organization that a small group of us created toward the end of last year, and we the organization was essentially created with a mandate to create a platform for citizens to share bold ideas, encourage dialogue, and positive and productive public dialogue about the future of Alberta, and we want to do so in a nonpartisan context. And part of the impetus for that was a bit of a frustration with how polarized the discussions tend to be, and also our sense that we need to focus on some of the big challenges the province faces in a context of mutual respect, and also informed by a long-term perspective about what it will take to be successful here over the next 30 years and more. So that's the impetus for this nonprofit organization. And the first project we launched with is the Possibility Panel. You can jump to the next slide, Steph. And the Possibility Panel is a group of people, of Albertans, who come from a wide range of backgrounds, and they're come from different communities and have different networks and achievements and so on, who will engage with Albertans on different topics and explore questions like what's possible for the future of Alberta. How do we want to face the future together? What big ideas should we pursue? We're doing that initially through a series of different themed topic areas. So as I said earlier, this is the second one. And we'll say later in the program what the upcoming topics will be in sessions. Thank you. I think the next slide we can jump to now. So for tonight's session, we've got 8 of those 30 members of the Possibility Panel who are going to be involved, as I said earlier. And I won't introduce them all now, but I will introduce them when I call upon them later. You've seen their names in the programs probably, so at least now there you can see their pictures. Next slide. I did just want to spend a moment before we get too far into it to talk about the values and the sort of approach we intend to take in how we convene these sessions. So I won't read all these, but there you see the next 30 values. I won't read them in detail, but respect, nonpartisanship, diversity, a long-term vision, and collaboration. And I'll give you a chance to read those. The next slide, if you can go to, is the Brave Space principles, and this is something that has sort of described the principles with which we hope to convene these sessions, and that we all set as principles and, I guess, guidelines for how to engage in these dialogues, in these sessions. And I'll just quickly go through them. You can read them on the screen, but our request of you, I guess, is to try to hold yourself and others accountable for living up to these principles in terms of how we engage. So one is to be present in this virtual space with each other. I know sometimes that can be challenging when there's lots of things going on, but as much as possible to be here. When we're here, and be together in these discussions. To be open to new ways of thinking, new ideas, to listen deeply and be curious, be aware and bring awareness of our own biases and assumptions and judgments. To hold this as a space of trust and confidentiality. We want people to feel comfortable to share their ideas, and part of that is knowing that that there's a confidentiality here in terms of not sharing necessarily who said what and so on. Focus on possibility. That's in keeping with the overall theme. We want to acknowledge and appreciate each other's gifts, and just overall kind of hold this brave space to be to have courageous conversations. that sometimes requires, you know, challenging ideas with one another. And so in that, we encourage you to challenge the ideas, not the people, to allow discomfort to lead to growth, and ultimately to take accountability for our own learning. So one other thing I do want to emphasize, and I mentioned this last week too, we know that there are, in particular, there are some young people here that have signed up for the session. So welcome to you, young people. You can self-identify, I guess, if whether you're a young person or not. But I do want to just make a special note to invite everyone to make sure that you're especially welcoming. If, for example, if you're in a breakout group and so on, you're especially welcoming to the young people, because sometimes these kind of settings might not be. I mean, there are some young people who will be absolutely fully confident to be engaged and vocal, but there's some that might not have experience doing so. So please encourage the young people to share their views as well. Thank you for that. I'll move on to the next slide. And I think this is, yeah, the last little setup thing, which is a quick overview of Slido. And if you're not familiar with Slido, I mean, if you've been at any of our sessions, then you're familiar with Slido already. If you have not and you're not, this is a little overview. So you can take out your phone. You can also do it on a second window on your computer, but it's generally kind of works better if you do it in the phone. And go to slido.com, and you'd have to enter the code with the hashtag next30. And there it'll pop up, you know, the questions that we'll be going through in the session, later in the session. So that's a little heads up on that. And if there's any troubles with it, you can let us know. I think that's all for now. Okay, here we are. We're trying out the first question. This is just to get a sense of a bit of the demographics of who's on the call here. So the question, if you haven't seen it there, please indicate your age range. And thank you, already 65 of you have responded. So our most common age range is 45 to 55. Second is 55 plus. Oh, it's changing around. So only, what is it, 2%, 3% that are less than 25. So it's not a huge contingent of young people. But I do want to call them out and welcome them. And in fact, what we're going to do next is ask the young people to share some reflections in particular. In terms of why a session on inclusive social fabric, I'm going to leave most of this for dialogue among you, and yeah, there must be a reason why you've shown up to this particular topic, and the panelists as well. But I will say just two things. One is, as we've thought about the various themes and topics, it's been clear, if you think about the pandemic, just how important it has been for our sense of well-being and our livelihoods and our health and so many facets of our lives to have resilience in our communities. And we've also, of course, seen the implications of inequity and of a lack of resilience in our communities. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to have this topic. Another is the recognition that I think it's been said, and I would agree, that Alberta's greatest resources are people. And to the extent that there are big challenges facing the province, we need the engagement of all our people in solving them. And when there are systemic barriers to people's participation in our communities and in our society, that is not only unjust, but it also inhibits our potential. So this is a chance for conversation about what's possible and how we can build a more inclusive, an even greater inclusive social fabric in the province. So I won't say anything more because I know our panelists are going to have more to say on this topic. But just before we get to them, let's do the youth perspective. We're talking about the long term here, so we really want to make sure that we hear from the people who have the greatest stake in the future, and that's our young people. And so if you are under 25 and we're trusting you to be honest about that, then I'll encourage you to go on Slido and answer the next question, which is, in one word, what do you want to see in Alberta's future in terms of an inclusive social fabric? Kindness, the first brave person. Thank you. Acceptance, collaboration, respect. Acceptance, imagination, compassion, honesty, dialogue, digital access, listening or listen, safety, education. Thank you. It looks like acceptance and kindness are the most commonly cited words about what you want to see in the future. So this is good for all of us to keep in mind as we head into the discussions. We talk about what's possible for the future of the province. Those are the things that our young people want to see. All right, so now we'll get into the first session with the panelists who will explore what's possible. And I'm just going to introduce them one at a time. And our first speaker who's going to speak for 5 minutes is Dr. Lindsay Tedes from the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. Go ahead, Lindsay.
Hi, thanks very much, Chad. I have just come off of writing a 530-page report that actually is trying to recommend how to achieve greater social inclusion in the province of British Columbia. So I will try to be much more succinct than that here. And I'll start by thinking about, when we think about social inclusion, we're thinking about, so I just popped over here, sorry. We're thinking about people and how do we weave them together into a stronger fabric. And the more tighter the weave, the stronger the fabric of society is going to be. And so as a person who is involved in analyzing public policy, forming public policy, critiquing public policy, I use a variety of tools to start thinking about how to go about doing that, because it's a very normative, that's where values come in. And so there is going to be bias. And so what I try to do is not have my own bias come in and try to use tools to guide my work in this area. And there's a number of tools that I use to try to think about how do we get a stronger social fabric. One of the most important tools that I use is a tool of philosophy that resonates a lot with me, and that's the veil of ignorance. I think about, I don't know what I'm going to be born into this world. And if I'm behind that veil of ignorance, does the world that I'm looking into look fair when I don't know what I'm going to be born, and what abilities I'm going to have, what kind of family it's going to be? Am I going to be a man or a woman or racialized, or any sort of outcome that I can have? And if I'm not willing to be born in any particular way, then I have to really start thinking about what are the things to help dismantle the barriers that make me uncomfortable with being born in a particular way. So that's one tool that I use to try to help increase that the weave of the social fabric. Another one that we came across when we were doing our work in BC is actually a principle from the Niska peoples, and it's called Our Common Bowl. And this was one, it actually aligns quite interesting with, oh God, now I can't believe I'm actually blanking on this one. Adam Smith, which is, you know, a thinker in economics. But the NISCA have this idea of a common bowl, and it's where they talk about, it's understood that since everyone relies on the same resources and community, all must contribute. And so there's an underlying reciprocity, that you take care of people who need it. And then when you are better off, you're just understood as having to also contribute to the bowl. And I think that that's important for a number of people who seem to think that there is no reciprocity sometime with helping people out, which I think is an unfortunate perspective to have, because it is amazing when you help people out that they do actually contribute back into our common bowl. And I think it's important to always remember that. And then another tool that I use, and I think is really, really important, is gender-based analysis and intersectionality. We all have, it's not one thing that actually impedes our ability to interact in the world. There's going to be a variety of things that come up that impede our interactions in the world. And you know, one of the things I've been saying a lot lately, if I as a white woman can experience harassment and discrimination and things like this in the workplace and out there in the world, then it doesn't take me much to get to the next step, that with all of my privilege, if I experience this, then it doesn't take me much to see that people without my privilege experience this in a greater degree than I ever do. And so we really need to make sure that we understand the system that we have been created by people with privilege. And our institutions and our systems and governance are systems that resemble those structures of power. And it is important that we make sure that we don't continue to recreate them, that we do dismantle them. And that is what allows more and more people to participate. And when more and more people are able to participate, we have a society, a better economy, we have more resources, and we have more resources to share, and the weave is tighter. And you know, I'm an economist, and this is where I come at this from. And I really hope that people can understand that social inclusion is not only about a better society, it's also about a better economy. And so I'll just leave it there, and I'll let other people take over from there.
Okay, thank you, Lindsay. That was a great way to get us started, and appreciate that. I should have mentioned, and I'll do it now, that if you have questions you want to pose to either Lindsay or to any of the panelists as they go, that you can enter them into Slido. So you can go in there and it'll be giving you the option to do that right now. And you can also kind of vote up the questions that you like, that other people have put in there, and that will give me as the moderator a chance to kind of read the room, so to speak, and see what questions are most interesting to you as participants. So when we get to the Q&A, that'll be helpful. So that's just a little reminder to do that. And yeah, I see some of you are already using the chat function to share reactions to what you're hearing, and or to provide references or links to resources based on what you're hearing. And please feel free to do that as well as we go. Okay, thank you, Lindsay. So the next panelist that we'll hear from is Tim Fox. And Tim will introduce himself in a moment, but his day job, I know, is a VP of Indigenous Relations and Equity Strategy with the Calgary Foundation. Tim, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks, Chad. Yeah, really good to be here tonight with all of you to share some thoughts on this important topic. I think I want to make a couple of points tonight. And the first one that I'll start with is, we know that there is a thought pattern that exists about racialized folks, not only in Alberta, but in Canada overall, in North America. Specifically, in this sort of context and from where I come from, that it's a negative thought pattern about Indigenous people. I believe that context matters a lot. Let me start there, just with the thought pattern that exists. Some of you might have been raised to believe this thought pattern about Indigenous people, that they are barbaric, uncivilized, and so aware of the deficit statistics. And when I talk about the deficit statistics, I mean, we are well aware that there are high numbers of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit children and young people in care. There are high numbers of Indigenous people in the justice system. We are well aware of these challenges, and sometimes it's those deficit statistics that even drive the work that we do. We lean on those deficit statistics to access funding support for our programs. Lindsay probably likely leaned on some of those deficit statistics to inform her report, so on and so on. What I'm more interested about, and what I'm going to talk about, what could be possible, is creating a new knowledge system and taking a deep dive into the context behind why those deficit statistics exist in the first place. Once we do that, and I feel like overall, some folks are scratching the surface when it comes to that. So we are aware of residential schools, but are we aware and are we truly reconciling with the settler ancestors who impose these infrastructures very intentionally to sort of eliminate and assimilate a group of people? I'm just not sure that we are taking those necessary steps. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. The second point that I want to make is that there is an old statistic from 2006 about this growing population for the Indigenous people. And although that's an old statistic, the trend is the same, that the Indigenous population is the fastest growing segment of the population, as well as we are observing more newcomers coming into our country. So there's this growth in population of racialized folks, specifically Indigenous people, and it's a young population. And I think that trend should tell us collectively a lot of things, that we have to prepare for this growth. We have to prepare the economy, that Indigenous and racialized folks have an insurmountable opportunity to contribute to the economic and social fabric of not only Alberta, but the rest of the country. But as Lindsay just alluded to, a lot of these systems and these institutions have been built off of power and privilege. And I think gone are the days when we should be preparing these young racialized Indigenous folks to adapt to these systems and institutions. We should be reframing the question to the institutions and systems like the political system, the healthcare system, the justice system, to say, what are you going to do as a system to shift and change your practice so that you better align, and so that racialized and Indigenous folks actually feel like they belong in your settler created systems. The third point that I wanted to talk about was bringing some levels of truth into the conversation. And so I briefly touched on this when I talk about taking a deep dive into why the deficit statistics exist in the first place. The moment we begin to even invite the conversation of reconciliation or decolonization, immediately folks go to, what do I have to give up? And what we're trying to say in the work of reconciliation and decolonization is you don't have to necessarily give up anything, but you do have to make some space and some room for another narrative, a missing narrative into the historical context that we know, and we're all sort of ingrained to learn in schooling in that system, that this truth isn't known in the way. So if we think about, oh man, there's my time. So if we think about the deficit statistics, there are socio and economic challenges that the Indigenous population is facing. All I'm trying to do and encourage and invite people to do is look at those socio and economic challenges and disparities through a lens of history and social injustice. I think that's a big part of the conversation that's missing. I think it's possible to amplify and uphold this very hard truth and to reconcile with that. But that involves a lot of reparations and healing, not only for Indigenous and racialized people, but more specifically for those of settler descent.
Okay. Thanks, Tim. That's a lot for everyone to reflect on, and I can see that people are reacting to it in the chat box already. I'll hold off my own questions and so on until we've heard from everyone. But thank you very much. And I just encourage everyone again to use the Q&A function in Slido if you want to pose any questions to the panelists. Okay, our third speaker is Rich Theroux, and Rich and his wife Jess are co-founders, I guess, of Rumble House Art Society. He might say a little bit more about what that is, so I won't go into detail, but Rich is also a teacher, an artist, and just has all kinds of interesting experience about this topic and perspective. So happy to hear from you now, Rich. Go ahead.
Well, first, I just want to say, Tim and Lindsay, those were really powerful and you really moved me. So I don't want to start crying in front of everybody. That was really powerful. Secondly, I'm not an expert on, anything to do with society. I kind of come from maybe the fringe. We kind of take things, okay, let me start with this. 8 years ago, we opened up an art gallery, and our art gallery is kind of a public space where people come in and they make art in the public, and then we sell the art through the gallery, and we support a lot of people. We tend to more focus just on our block, right? Like on Saturdays, we do a street clean. We clean up for an hour, then we go for hamburgers. There's a really strong community amongst the artists nearby that we're working with. We didn't intend to start out with inclusion. I think we even maybe started out with, traditionally as artists, you kind of, what drives maybe the value in art is this kind of idea of being exclusive and the elite. And so you're trying to create this product that you want to sell, and the idea that people would be chasing around wanting to be part of the party is kind of where I came from in terms of arts. But we built this space where it was initially meant to be just for us. Immediately people started showing up. So strangers were coming into our space, and artists were coming into our space, teenagers coming into our space. When I talk about inclusion, I'm talking about everybody, meaning if you took the lock off your front door and took the front door off your house, our studio downtown is a lot like our home. And, I guess the thing with inclusion is when you mean everybody, it could be, somebody that comes from a different place from you. It could be somebody at a different level of education from you. It could be somebody who stole your bike last year. So we have this situation where by making the space accessible to everybody, there's all kinds of messiness that happens. And if it's not messy, if you're working on inclusion and it's not messy, there's a pretty good chance that you've just created a new elite, a new space where you and your friends feel comfortable. So we've got this space where we make everybody welcome, and then you run into problems. So you have maybe people come in and they've got beefs. One kid spray painted on another person's wall, or you're selling artwork and perhaps the art buyer recognizes, some of the artwork from his garage door. And so when we promise a welcome door to everybody, and then you do run into frictions, then you have to find a way to balance that. And then you have this other problem where you told everybody's welcome. And then if there's this conflict, then you have to resolve the conflict. You don't always end up on the side you want to be on because you've promised that everybody's welcome. So sometimes the nice people are leaving because somebody that scared them in the past is still in the space. And that can be really difficult because, you're saying, well, now you have to leave because it's become unsafe. And, you might have somebody screaming at you, well, you said inclusive. So when I talk about this and when I think about this, I'm only talking from my perspective and on my block, where we're doing our best to feed a lot of people, and we gave around 300 coats away last year, and we put blankets out, and we always have food out. People come into the gallery, they use our Wi-Fi, and we take care of people. And so then if you're gonna talk about an inclusive society, and then you recognize that that means everybody, that might be people that you don't get along with, and then having people you don't get along with near you creates a level of resilience and strength, because you're constantly having to adapt. There's no set of rules you can put out to make things work. You can't pre-plan anything. You're constantly adapting, which helps you to grow stronger. By having people that are different from you, from all walks of life, you know, criminals, politicians, cops. I think at one point when we lost Gorilla House, 4 of our regulars ended up on the Calgary's Most Wanted list. 1 ended up on Canada's Most Wanted list. Only a few weeks earlier, the Justice Minister had stopped by, and he's in a photo only an arm's length away from somebody that was 6 months away from being on the Canada's Most Wanted. So you have to find a balance for this. And the way I guess that we built this balance wasn't so much by structure or pre-thinking situations. We built a critical mass. So it started with me, and I had an idea, and I brought in my 8 friends, and they understood my idea. And you have to grow very slowly as you keep bringing new people into this situation. You have to resist the idea of growing. You know, if an opportunity presents itself, you have to resist the opportunity to leap at it, because you need to have more people that believe in what you believe in than the number of people that are joining whatever structure you're building. So I don't know how you fix a whole country, but I know starting on my block, it started with 1 space and 1 person. And then when there was 8 people, we started inviting people in. And then when there was 20 people, we kept inviting people in. And as long as the positive thoughts outnumber the new people that are coming in with potentially negative thoughts, then it kind of works itself out that you have this equilibrium. The only thing I would caution against is, even when I say this, I'm expressing the fact that we built this whole thing around being inclusive and making sure that everybody's involved, you know, children, people, somebody that stole your bike, somebody that did much worse than stealing your bike, people of all walks of life and all levels of education. And then you end up with people that can't come in anymore, and it's not inclusive. So, I mean, it's a bit of a utopia when you imagine making a space for everybody, because we're not just talking about, well, from where I'm sitting, we're not just talking about groups of people. We're trying to make everybody welcome, which will create challenges. Ongoing challenges.
Awesome. Thank you, Rich. I love the use of Rumble House as a microcosm for the big challenge.
I never actually leave the block, so.
All right. Well, I see the questions are coming in now, so we'll just move on here. 1 more speaker, and that's Sean Crump, and then we'll get on to the Q&A. So Sean is the president of Universal Access. He's an accessibility and universal design expert, and also the newest member of the Possibility Panel. Really pleased to have you here, Sean, and take it away for your 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. I'll definitely try keeping it to 5. I pulled a card out of Tim's deck and set a timer just because I tend to ramble. I'm, excited because I get to represent a demographic or a community of people that are often underrepresented in conversation, especially around inclusion. And we make up, we span gender, we span race, and that's individuals living with a disability. I didn't grow up with a disability. When I was 19 years old, I broke my neck, spent a year in the hospital, and now live every day utilizing a wheelchair for my independence as a quadriplegic. And it was amazing how dramatic my reality shifted from somebody who had no thought or concern about access or inclusion. white male, 6 feet. I wasn't excluded from much in 19, to somebody who had to call ahead to everywhere he went to make sure that there was access, had to inform his friends as to whether or not I could go and weekend somewhere with them, figuring out how to travel, fly, and there weren't a lot of answers, and there still aren't. You know, we talk about physical access or inclusion into spaces and environments, and yet there's barriers in our communities and in our society that are physical barriers, keeping people out from being included in events, culture, you know, experience. COVID's shown the challenge and detriment that being isolated has on somebody's mental well-being. And yet this is something that has gone on for generations for people living with disabilities. This is something that isn't a new construct of reality for them, but something that they've been struggling with for a long time. People living with disabilities have a 3 times higher suicide rate, often increased with substance abuse, just because they don't have that contributive aspect to their life. There aren't the like goal-oriented ambitions that most people have. It was shocking to me when I was kind of looking into these things. The higher educated you are with a disability, the less likely you are to be employed. I would think education, the higher educated you are, the less dependent you are on physical attributes and more on your intellectual contribution, and that tends to not be the case. And so, you know, I wanted to kind of give that as a foundational overlay, because this is about possibility, not about what currently exists. And to switch that from what currently, you know, we experience to how can this change? And I think that that physical barrier aspect is one thing that we can change in our communities, is one thing we can advocate for or support those businesses that create inclusive environments to make sure there are those ramps, accessible washrooms, inclusive places that we have. Canada just received royal assent in 2019 for legislation to support accessibility. Yes, it's 30 years after the US. Yes, it's probably one of the laggards of countries to institute something like this, but we're making progress in the right direction. And I think that that is a very inspiring thing to see and to kind of be a part of, because again, it's not going to change the systemic thought or consideration of people with disabilities, or that social normalization of interaction and engagement. But it's allowing people to confidently get into the community knowing that their needs will be met. And I think that the more we start seeing this demographic of people represented in our communities, the more normalized it becomes. Accessibility is kind of the one step, but again, we're talking about and looking at inclusion and having, you know, equal opportunity. And I'm not talking about equal outcome for those living with disabilities, but equal opportunity of, you know, having the possibility of applying for jobs on a level playing field, or having that, you know, assurance that the event you want to go to or attend or register for is inclusive. You know, today, closed captioning was introduced to this panel. That is fantastic. That means anybody with any kind of auditory difficulty or challenges can now contribute, can now be involved in something that a week ago they may not have felt comfortable participating in. So it's little simple things that are being done on a regular basis that are opening up this inclusive narrative and this confidence amongst communities to kind of stand up and start advocating, and to really listen to those that are speaking out and trying to understand the challenges that they are faced with and see how we can help overcome that. And so I take the earlier foundation that I mentioned and kind of put ourselves in today's situation, and knowing that there is that empathy people can share about isolation and the challenges that maybe a loved one that they know have gone through, and can relate that to the challenges that maybe people of disability or any other demographic of individuals who don't feel comfortable in their communities because they're underrepresented, we can grow from that point. We can learn, and we can rebuild the new normal to really kind of include those thoughts and those considerations. So both kind of physically and socially engage with people and create those opportunities. So I kind of wanted to leave it at kind of a high level consideration, because I do only have 5 minutes, and I know there's a lot left for us to kind of engage and, you know, speak around and do tonight. So I'm going to leave it at that. And thanks for listening. And I hope that gave everybody something to take away.
Thank you, Sean. It definitely did. Very inspiring and thought-provoking. You talked about rising empathy and maybe awareness, and I think you're alluding to the pandemic kind of contributing to that a little bit too. So I'm going to sort of bridge from that concept to the question that seems to be the most highly ranked question here for everyone on Slido. And so this is actually for anyone to respond to. I will, Lindsay, the next one is going to be directly to you, so maybe we'll let the other three go first on this one. But what would you say are the best examples of past or existing Albertan efforts on social inclusion? What are the pieces you want to build on in your experience? So maybe if we could give one example each that you think are, you know, really something to be proud of, something to build from, and so on. Rich, do you want to go first? If you're ready, I can go elsewhere if you're not. You're, oh yeah,
I'm going to wait on that one. I'm going to give it some thought.
Sean?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a shake at that one to start. Efforts on social inclusion. I think that there have been movements in kind of the right direction for opening the narrative and consideration. I think on a municipal and provincial level, you know, there have been steps taken, but I think in the private sector, you've seen like a little bit of a larger leap to where they've started instituting, you know, corporate social responsibility goals and reporting on their SDG compliance to the UN. And I think that we're starting to see some of these things not only impact investment or investor decisions or business strategy or any of those kind of things, but also the responsibility and they need to report on what they are contributing towards and meet their goals in the plans that they're reporting on. So I think we're seeing a grow in accountability. Again, I think there's a long way to go, but at least it's that we're moving the needle in that direction where more people are being held accountable, not just those in the public or in kind of that spotlight era, but more kind of even behind the scenes. So I think we'll see a lot of advancement because of some of those initiatives. And, you know, social investing is another big growing aspect of business and all of that. So that's encouraging to me.
Thanks, Sean. Tim, do you want to go next?
Sure. Yeah, so from the perspective of, you know, racialized folks and Indigenous folks, I know that the fact of the matter is not a lot of racialized or Indigenous folks feel like they necessarily belong in this day and age, and I'm sort of hard pressed to find a good example of a promising practice that exists. What I do know is that the work of social inclusion from a racialized perspective has been happening for decades, specifically from minority groups, those advocacy groups that are pushing for more equitable practices. What's different about this day and age in this contemporary time is that those efforts are now being noticed. It's amplified. So the rest of the world, and probably largely due to the public murder of George Floyd last June, now we're seeing this emerging, growing interest from the dominant narrative, mainstream organizations to all of a sudden focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion when we know that there have been best practices being designed by racialized organizations and Indigenous grassroots groups for decades. And so I think now we're at an opportunity to really sort of engage with those groups and try to find ways to amplify their efforts, mobilize them, but also realizing that a large portion of Albertans also have a responsibility around mobilizing what it means to be foster equity and foster reconciliation and decolonization. So not alleviating ourselves from the responsibility regardless of our racial background, but that this is work for everyone and that there are really promising, impactful learning and unlearning opportunities that are emerging and have existed. It's just a matter of tapping into them and then embedding them into the fabric of these institutions.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Rich, I'll go to you in a moment. I just wanted to note Ken Lima Coelho's comment in the chat box where he says one of the best examples of social inclusion in Alberta is the willingness of governments to build social infrastructure and then let it be run by strong nonprofits. That doesn't happen everywhere, and it's a powerful model. Thanks for putting that in there, Ken. Okay, I'll see if you have anything you want to say now, Rich.
Yeah, well, I kind of got surprised by the first. I guess the way I would describe it is that my wife and I work full time as teachers in the day, and then we work all night at the Rumble House at night. So we do get a little isolated. So the question, what great things are happening in Alberta? It's tough because we don't get out much other than where we're at. But you know, rather than looking at the large, maybe I could talk about the small. Is I had a young man on the weekend that reached out in distress, and so I ended up picking up some supplies from a tent and a sleeping bag and some boots. And coincidentally, an acquaintance of mine, a friend of mine, the other day was sort of discussing his thoughts on socialists and socialism. And so what I did was I contacted this friend of mine who had some negative opinions about socialism, and I partnered them to mentor each other. And so, you know, I guess one of the best examples in Alberta, I didn't want to point at myself and go, oh, this is what we do on the weekends, but you see, it's at the point where you're dealing with somebody that has perhaps some addictions issues and some challenges in living on the street. You reach out for help, and you get a lot of advice on how to get the sort of the typical help. And maybe some of the people we're dealing with have already been kicked out of the places you go to for typical help. And I think it's not until you try and find a place and a home and a job for some of these people that are living in the margins that you really get the grasp of, oh, here's a great person and so filled with hope and so filled with possibilities. And, you know, it shouldn't be any trouble at all to find them a job. So there's this one gentleman I know who might be quite, what would be that? He's not connected with the group of people that maybe are looking for help so much. So in that one little instance, there's these two people that had come together and I think learned from each other. But, you know, I can't speak to what's happening on larger scales with the governments because I've just got my nose to the grindstone on my own block.
Thanks, Rich. That's great to hear, because I think what we can really be inspired about when we're talking about possibility are the specific examples like what you're describing there. So thank you for that. And Lindsay, you could either respond to that one, or the other question that's there for you is, what were some of your top recommendations in the report you just put out from BC on this topic? So take either of those if you like.
I'll take the one about my report. That one's easier. I've only lived in Alberta for 3 years now, I think. So I don't always know a lot of the background policies. I have learned about Ralph Bucks now, though, and I wouldn't actually put that as a good example of social inclusion. So our report had 65 recommendations. For me personally, I think actually this was our top recommendation. and this was poignant given yesterday in Alberta, the court case related to youth aging out of care. We had a number of recommendations related to a greater network of supports for youth aging out of care, making sure that they are supported until they are 25. We as society, I think that this is a really important one for social inclusion. We as society owe it to these youth aging out of care to continue being a parental figure to them between 18 and 24 to 25. Kids are not adults at 18. Come on, we know that. Look at how many of us as parents are still supporting their kids between 18 to 24. They need continued support. They need, and this is income. This is training, access to education. They need social workers. They need so much help. And the more help we give them, the better off they are going to be. We lose so many of them to death and suicide once they age out. A large number of our social assistance cases are actually youth aging out. So the more we support them, the better life they are going to have. And it pays off in terms of their ability to reciprocate as we talk about that common goal, and actually give back and almost pay back that support that we have. So for me, that was a really a big part of our recommendations.
Okay, thanks, Lindsay. It's interesting now to think about how those transfer in parallel in Alberta. I noticed in the chat box some comments about libraries and accessibility and the rise of the youth voice and so on. So thank you for those comments as people are putting them in. There's another question that's ranked pretty high here, so I'm going to ask it and invite anyone who wants to jump in on this one. How do you address inclusivity in an era of social media, misinformation, and heightened polarity where differences are used to spread fear, hate, and violence? So it's a tough one. Anyone want to jump in on that one? Rich?
Can I answer?
Yeah, go ahead, Rich.
How about in person?
Do you mean a Zoom call or?
No. So when you're talking about the social media and the misinformation, I think, getting out and meeting people in person goes a long way. Eating together, you're right. My wife's reminding me about COVID, but I recognize right now we're meeting on Zoom. But it's probably because of COVID that we got here to this meeting, right? So everybody became Zoom experts fast, and I suspect, it's like I said, still you can still find ways to interact in a human manner. Maybe that's kind of what's the whole point of Zoom versus watching TV or writing little comments in the more the social media where you're not face to face.
Yeah. Well, and I love the premise of what you do, Rich, in the sense of art as a way to get people out to interact in person and create the space for those kind of collisions you're talking about. Anyone else want to weigh in on this topic? Tim?
Yeah, I have a thought. I think before we can get it to in person, sort of considering the times that we're in right now, is just be mindful of who is telling the story. I feel like there are a lot of folks who claim to be experts on particular pieces of knowledge or, reporting on certain stories, but they either lack the lived experience or they are not including the full narrative behind what it is they're reporting on or what it is they're posting on. So just be really critical about the things that you read and who is the messenger behind that. We're experiencing a lot of this in the Indigenous community where there's coverage about issues that are happening across the country that is coming from a one-sided narrative. It's not sort of coming from the reflections of those with lived experience. And that truth that I was talking about is not amplified. It's sort of just focused on the detriments of that particular situation. So just be mindful of who's telling the story, I think, in this day and age. And also take it upon yourself to do deeper levels of self-directed research and learning if you're sort of grappling with something that's surfacing on social media.
Okay, thanks, Tim. There's a great chat going on there about social media and what to do about it and how to interact with it, I think, as well. Sean or Lindsay, do you have anything you want to say on that one? It's okay if you don't.
I think I'll take a bye on this one. Thanks, Chad.
Okay. Okay. I really like this question a little lower down, so I'm going to use the moderator's prerogative and ask it. How do we learn to participate in the messy and the challenging? Rich, it seems like you're kind of an expert in that. I mean, maybe to some extent we all are, but any insights to share on, obviously this is messy and challenging space in many respects, and so I think this person's probably looking for skills or tips on how to engage in that way.
We have to think fast on your feet, and you have to be adaptable. And I think you have to kind of lead with your heart. And I think we have a few mantras. One of our mantras is nobody said it would be easy. And you need to pivot quite a bit too. So if you say one thing one moment in terms of being inclusive, and the next moment you're asking somebody to leave because they've made somebody feel unsafe, like I said before, they'll throw it back in your face that you promised inclusivity. And then you just need, to be able to deflect and say, listen, I'm complex, you got to go. So having some pre-prepared responses ready for when you're going to, switch from southpaw to a righty is important. And then the other thing I was going to say is, like when I'm talking about inclusivity, you could think about it as, from a teaching perspective. I think if you've ever had, gone to school with a kid that got expelled, I think that, we have this kind of small idea that, if, imagine in a school setting where if a student isn't fitting within that group, they get expelled. Well, they don't disappear, right? So inclusion means everybody, and people don't go away, and if you have a storefront art gallery downtown where you're feeding people, you have to leave, everybody has to leave happy no matter what, which, you promise we're going to make everybody happy all the time, and people keep lecturing you saying you can't make everybody happy all the time. But so long as your intention is to keep that promise, you've got your whole life to fail at it. so as long as I don't ever give up doing my best to make everybody happy all the time, every single person that comes through my space can come back and kick the windows in the middle of the night. So I am obligated for the safety of the people around me to try and negotiate and find a way that everybody leaves feeling loved and nurtured. And that comes at the expense of having to work long hours and to never giving up, and just, leading with your heart, because people don't go away. They might leave your space, but they still exist. And so we really need everybody to heal, and everybody to do better, and everybody to survive. And I guess that's why I, have this bit of a conflict where if there is ever a point in my space where somebody can't be there anymore because they've created too much of a problem, well, then you can't help them anymore, right? And so to cast somebody out is to say, hopefully somebody will do a better job at including this person than I did, right? And I saw in the chat somebody asked if about safety and comfort, and you have to have a safe space for everybody, but it's a balance back and forth constantly between people that are misunderstood, and there's no good and bad. Everybody's doing their best, right?
Thanks, Rich. It looks like the lead with your heart comment seems to have resonated with a lot of people. Thank you for that. It's a good thing to leave us with, I think. So I let this go on a little longer than planned, partly because there was so much engagement and a lot of great questions. But I'm gonna wrap it here and thank the four of you for your comments, your inspiration, your pause for thought. And all of this is to help set us up for the next section, where we're going to explore your thoughts as participants about how we might build a social fabric where all Albertans feel like they belong. So I will I'll set this up, and as I do that, just remind you about, first of all, the Brave Space principles, and I really want to remind you about how we would like you to show up respectfully with one another in these conversations. I'll also say in the breakout rooms, and I'm going to guide you through in a moment what the flow for this conversation will be, but if there's ever a point where you don't feel comfortable because of the conversation or any individual's comments in particular or whatever, if you feel you're getting into a space that you don't feel comfortable, please just leave the room and come back to the main room, and we can talk to you about it, and we can also reassign you to a different room. As I send you off into the groups, I'm just going to tell you about the 4 types of conversations, and you can see it on the screen. On a lot of conversations end up on the lower part of this quadrant, talking nice. So we're not necessarily, we're scraping the surface maybe of the conversation, or talking tough, where we're debating and we're listening to the other person mainly for the purpose of trying to find arguments that you can poke holes in. We really want to try to encourage you to think about floating up to the top space, or entering into these conversations with an intention to be inquiry focused, with curiosity, and ultimately to pursue generative dialogue, where you're connecting to ideas that others are, you're connecting your ideas with others' ideas, and it's co-creation. So I'll leave you with that, and I'll move to the next slide. Just kind of gives you the flow here. You'll be in a room with probably a bunch of people you don't know. I know for some people that would be a little bit nerve-wracking, but honestly, the feedback we've had is overwhelmingly that this is people's favorite part of the session. So let yourself be uncomfortable as you enter into that space of having to interact with some people you don't know. And take a couple minutes to introduce yourselves, who you are, where you're from. Maybe share an insight, just something that resonated with you from the panel, or a question you're asking yourself after having heard them. And then try to personalize it. Do a round where you each share a personal story in relation to this topic, why it matters to you, what's your experience. And then finally, we'll get you working, discussing on what ideas you have to find, what ideas you find most compelling for Alberta on this topic. Both the ones you've heard and any of your own ideas. We will put up in the chat in your breakout room when it's time to move on to the next part here, roughly. Obviously, that's just a rough guidance. There are no formal facilitators here, so we'll leave it to you all to rise to the occasion and interact with one another constructively here. I'm just going to check to see if there's anything else I need to tell anyone about the breakouts. I think that is it. I'll put the question up, or those are the questions actually. So we'll send you off to your breakout rooms now, and you'll have about 25 minutes or so for this. Okay, welcome back everyone. I hope you had a good discussion in your breakout group. I suspect that it might not have felt long enough. It always feels like these things could go on longer, so apologies in advance if that was the case, but I want to make sure we wrap wrap here at the time we said we would. So what we're going to do now is harvest some ideas from you on this topic. All of this is framed around a big question of how might we. And in just a moment, I'm going to ask you, and what we'll do is start off, actually you can go to the next slide, Steph. The question we'll be asking you about, and just hold off doing anything with this. We're going to take 2 minutes, or yeah, roughly 2 minutes, maybe 1 minute, for you to just reflect on this. Maybe even to jot something down if you need to. But one idea that you find most compelling to build an inclusive social fabric so that every Albertan feels like they belong. This is what we're going to be asking you, and we don't need to hear from the groups. We actually will hear from every individual who wants to share one, and we're going to do that through Slido. I'm just going to put up on the screen here an example. Last week, we ended up with some answers that were like one-word answers, and that's okay if that's how you feel. But what we would really encourage you to do is try to build out a little bit of a more specific idea, like the one on the screen as an example. And the reason for that is because we're going to enter those into Slido, and we're going to give everyone a chance to kind of vote up the ideas that you like the most, or you're most interested, you find most compelling. And to do that, it's easier if the idea is described in at least some degree of depth, not just a 1 or 2 word thing. So there's an example. What if every grade 12 student spent 2 months in their final year volunteering in the classroom, peppered through the district, providing support to all students and teachers in all other grades? Wouldn't Albertans have a stronger understanding of the value of education? And the opportunity to enter that in is now, it's on slido.com, and the hashtag is #next30. And then you can start entering the ideas there. Okay, so here they come. And take your time to put your answer in. Don't feel rushed. But as you do that, or as you see others' ideas, give a little thumbs up there to the ones that you find most compelling. All right, so it looks like we've got about 34 responses in there now. Let you keep thinking about it. I notice, as you do, maybe that the guaranteed annual income, so every Albertan is lifted out of the context of scarcity into building our future strengths together, is so far the top ranked idea. Also one on improving inclusive curriculum where we encourage connections with communities, stories, and places. But go ahead and go through all the ideas there to take a look at the ones that you find most compelling. Okay, thanks, folks. I see a lot of ideas around relationships, education, building connections, familiarity and comfort with many cultures and faith groups. Great. Thank you for typing your ideas out in a little bit more depth. That's much appreciated. And as those come in, I'll just reiterate that we're going to do something with these. We don't know exactly what yet, but we're harvesting these both to get, as many ideas on the table as we can, and also just an early sense of which ones people find most compelling. All that will be fed into the possibility panel to sift through and to synthesize into some output. So I'm going to say one more minute for this, and then we're going to move on to the closing reflections. And by the way, make sure you stay through to the end, because there's a nice little surprise at the end. I see there's still maybe 25 people who haven't put their answer in. So I'll encourage you to still do it if you're still thinking about it. If you want to do it while we're hearing the closing reflections, that's okay too. Okay, thank you. So keep going on that, but we'll move now to the closing reflections. To do this, I'm going to call on 4 different panelists than the 4 we heard from earlier on, and they've each been asked to give a 2-minute summary of what they heard, key messages, ideas that resonate with them, and so on. So first person I'm going to ask is Salima Kassam, from the Executive Director of the Sunrise Community Resource Center. Salima?
Hi. Well, this has just been an incredible conversation tonight. So I have 1,000 thoughts, but I will try and keep it brief. First, I thought it was beautiful how we started with talking about, a physical space that meant something to us. And just out of the comments that I saw rolling through that, I just really saw how as a group, and perhaps it is our Canadianism, we're so in love with the power of nature. We're in love with our homes, our roots, the people that we love, our families, and these are the things that drive us. As well as this, there was a lot of great mentions of water, of mountains, of this whole great country, and also a lot of mentions of like moving across this country from one place to another. So I thought that was amazing. I thought we also, at the beginning, just started with this element of curiosity, beginning with, the curiosity of wanting to know what the young people in the room have to say. And I love that about this whole process, is that it's just, hopefully sparking a lot of curiosity all over the place. And then we had a fantastic conversation or talk with Lindsay. And the idea of this concept of the veil of ignorance really stuck with me. I do believe for a lot of other folks, the concept of the bowl really stuck out, and our common and collective bowl. But I will talk for one second about why this veil of ignorance question stuck with me in it, or philosophy or framework stuck with me. And that's because I'm actually adopted. And so I've always thought about that. I've always thought to myself, what if I wasn't born in Canada? Like, what if it wasn't in Canada that this young girl got pregnant too early in life and needed to let go of, not raise a child? My life just could have been so drastically different had it not been for the fact that this country was here to look after me right away, and make sure that I eventually, first it looked after me because I was premature. And so I needed our fantastic healthcare system to just survive. And then I needed our social service system in order to find my beautiful and loving parents. Tim took us through some really great concepts, including reminding us that context matters. And I'm a big fan of that. I think context does matter. Context is everything. And so how do we make the room and the space for new narratives, new contexts, and also I really thought what was really cool about what Tim said was about talking about how we're always talking about our deficits, especially when it comes to perhaps specific groups of people in our country. And then later on in my breakout room, we had a great conversation about how can we take our deficits and flip them around, turn them into opportunities, turn them into, our strengths for the future. And I really loved how Tim talked about it's not necessarily the role of the people to make that happen, but rather we have to challenge the system to look at its own deficits and change those. Okay, I'll stop talking. There's so much good stuff here.
That's great.
Too much good stuff. Too much good stuff.
Thank you, Salima. That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story too. Lior Rothschild is the Executive Director of Canadian Business for Social Responsibility. I'm going to ask him to go next.
Thank you, Chad. Somebody in my breakout group mentioned that they have been to every one of these that we've done so far, and they said that this is their favorite one. And I have to agree, just because some of the perspectives that have been shared are deeply personal and very important, very meaningful. And I just, in sort of scrolling through the chat, there was one comment about, and not to pick on anybody, but there was a comment made about how, sometimes these kind of conversations are a bit abstract, and that, it's almost like easier to like sort of focus on the actions and just kind of like start planning those. But I do think that, and I hope you agree with me, that sometimes really listening makes a big, big difference, because we all come to this space with a lot of bias, regardless of what background we come from. We bring so much of our own experience and our perspectives to this conversation. And so just like pretending that the bias doesn't exist will not make it go away. It's about sort of acknowledging that and saying that the changes that are required, they're not just going to naturally evolve by themselves. It actually does require some intervention, and we have to seek out the perspectives that don't exist and ask who's not in the room right now. And I think that, COVID-19 has taught us all some really important lessons, and many of those lessons, I think Sean Crump did a really good job of sort of talking about it from the perspective of somebody that has to plan sort of every movement, every event, every space that they move into. We're all kind of in that place right now where there's a little bit of a feeling of isolation, and so some tough lessons there. But I think the youth who Chad asked them to share what the future looks like from their perspective, they said kindness and acceptance, and a number of other things too. But I think that really stands out to me. The idea of wanting to belong, the idea of removing barriers and eliminating isolation, and to like not just sort of say it, yeah, we have these values, but like actually authentically talking about what those challenges are and how difficult it is to actually remove them, leading with the heart and being authentic. I think that sort of came out in some of the conversations today. I think Rich did a really good job of sort of saying that if you're actually going to include people, it means including the people that you don't necessarily get along with. And we don't see that in our politics, right? And our politics are so polarized. Social media can be polarized. In the breakout room, one person talked about the fact that like this hashtag Karen is like a very sort of derogatory thing that is really mocking a particular way of being in the world. And the mocking doesn't lead to understanding, it leads to hardening of positions. And so I think that, you know, that idea of leading from the heart, and why are we doing this? It's really about, you know, like what Tim reminded us in the beginning. It's about seeking the truth. And if we understand all aspects of the truth, we all have pieces of it. And if we kind of seek to uncover it, almost like we're sort of investigating and piecing it together, then I think that there's a lot of progress that can be made. I have the fortunate opportunity to work with a number of leading companies through an association that helps companies work through their climate goals and issues of inequality. And the reason they're doing that is because that's what the investment community is demanding of them. So there is some rapid change happening right now. And I think that, yeah, you know, again, back to what Tim said, it's, you know, like, look at who is talking about that change and making sure that we hear all the voices, because we're going to need all of us to bring our truth to the table if we want to actually be in the kind of solution space to solve the really big challenges that we need going forward in Alberta.
Right. Thanks very much, Lior. That's great. Next, I'm going to ask Brenda Barrett, who operates Earthworks Farm near Stettler. And I will just mention we are going to go a little bit over 9, so I'm hoping everyone can stick for a couple extra minutes, because, like I said, the closing be a little bit special. Okay, Brenda, go ahead.
Thanks. And I think I'm going to pick up a few threads that the other three have already, or other two I've already touched on. But I guess one of the first pieces that I've looked at, that I wrote down multiple times tonight, is the making space and room for the missing narratives. But I think it's also about making the space and then really listening. And what that means for me is showing up with curiosity. And that can seem very intangible, and yet I guess it's because it's been my theme, and my own curiosity has been around curiosity this past year. But there's some really amazing studies out there about how we can actually learn, that even if this isn't maybe a natural way we show up, we can learn as individuals, but also build that into our systems of how do we lean in with curiosity so we can see what we're missing. We can see who's not in the room, and include that, because it strengthens all of us. And that really leads me even to this, I guess, a question or a piece about how do we then design for those who aren't being included in the average? Because I think a lot of times we talk about, you know, the dominant and the privileged, but truly a lot of our systems that we're living under are designed for the average. And realizing that as we include more, make more space for, and listen to the missing narratives, listen to the missing abilities, and design to include more, it isn't about having to exclude anyone. So, and I'm speaking really from a quite privileged position in most of my identities. And I've really learned that as I include more people, it still leaves room enough for me, and it actually allows me to show up even stronger. And so I think that's that piece of inclusiveness is about how do we amplify, listen and amplify so that there's more, and there's more abundance, and how do we acknowledge that? And I was really struck by Rich and talk, and I'm going to sit with this for a while, about the piece about having and building a system that has more people that believe in what you believe in than those who want to join. So a very intentional snowball effect in some ways, which spoke to me about something someone said back to me from one of the organizations I've been working with around how they build, understand their own intersectionality, understand some of the power and privilege in their own system in order to allow more people. And that group actually reflected back and said how big change happens with small conversations. Because in that small group, they weren't small conversations, it was a small group having some pretty deep conversations. But in that group, we had people across the whole system who by building understanding, we're also making changes across the system, and therefore we're shifting their entire system. And so again, I guess it's that invitation. It seems perhaps fluffy, to lead with our heart, but I do think if we all really start showing up in this way in the systems we're in and pushing and challenging, we need all of us everywhere. Weaving an inclusive society, not all of us congregating in one place in order to really shift things. And I realized I set a timer and I've doubled my time. Sorry, Chad.
Okay, no, that's great, Brenda. Thank you. I love that you've been curious about curiosity. That's awesome. Okay, the final closing reflection is going to be from Wakefield Brewster. Wakefield is in addition to being a registered massage therapist, he's also a poet and spoken word artist. So he's going to close us off with a poem, I think. Is that right, Wakefield? Welcome. Oh,
You're on mute.
your mute is, oh no.
There we go.
There
How's
we go.
that?
Yep. Great.
As I was saying, I can't massage you all, so yeah, you're going to get poetry. Thank you for having me. My name is Wakefield Brewster. I'm a professional poet and spoken word artist, and I'm a far better poet than I am a conversationalist. So what I'd like to do is try to capture a lot of the discussion that I had heard in this great meeting of people around this theme of inclusion. And with this poem, I know that you can't speak to everyone in the room at all times. However, you can always speak to someone at some time. So what I'm hoping is that with this poem that is tail-ending inclusion, it is titled Community, and I hope that everyone can find a piece of themselves inside of this poem. There's so much in the room, so much spirit and essence. It comes from priority, positive presence. And in all this effervescence, we all shine incandescence. This is the realest on the reel of reality. For frontin' and fooling only fosters fatality. The death of what knows, the death of what shows, the reason for slows, the reason for woes. Let's all plant the seeds of what goodwill grows. Let's all wet a drop in the goodwill flows. I have always personally believed that success does not lie solely in intelligence, but also in communication and common sense. So when it truly counts, please all let's recompense, cause it ain't all about poignant piles of pence. Lead a flock of one if you must, and shun the sheeple. We do it for the premise, we do it for the people. Let's rival the sun like a proud and tall steeple. Though all those good deeds we deem possible, seeking out solutions and pressing out the plausible. Coming out of comfort zones and coming together, tapping our technology to tighten the tether. Look at how the palette in this room is the proof. The clearest commonality supporting the youth. It takes a whole village just to raise one child. Without the greatest guidance, they gon' run buck wild. But here we all are with that greatest intention. Props to the next 30, honorable mention. Allowing me to bring to thee my artistic expression. To complement complacently and deepen this depression that we're all making on this place called Earth. The urgency to work together, work at what it's worth. Libraries, calm centers, clean cities, life mentors. Tell on atop the mountain and let your angels sing it. Say it on the microphone, I wait for y'all to bring it. You bring it to the boardrooms, you bring it with impunity, you bring it to the forefront, and you bring to your community.
Oh, wow.
Thank you.
That was amazing, Wakefield. Incredible.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. That was an incredible summary of everything, and so inspiring.
Thank you.
I don't know if everyone realized, but really, truly, he was working on that through the course of the whole session. So what a display of talent.
Thanks for everything. So I will get out of the way and let you close it properly, but thank you for letting me share some words. And I just truly feel that if you're going to speak to the world, you must really, really, really earn it by trying to listen to it first. So thanks for letting me listen to you guys.
Okay, thanks, Wakefield. Well, that is hard to follow, but we'll just wrap up with one last slide, and that's just to let you know what's coming up with the possibility panel. So if you haven't already subscribed to the newsletter, you can get there through the website, thenext30.ca. We now have the next 4 sessions are all scheduled. There's the dates there. Energy and climate coming next week, then health and wellness, provincial budget, and attracting talent. And those are the dates. There'll be a couple others as well, but those are the next ones that are scheduled. You'll get an email with an evaluation survey, and we really hope that you'll fill it out because it helps us a lot to plan the next sessions and really take your input seriously. So please, I really encourage you to fill that out. And of course, follow the Next 30 and share your reflections on these sessions with your networks. And let's see if we can keep the conversation going with these next topics. Thanks very much, everyone.